They said cutting my job would save money. They thought I was expendable, just another name they could cross off the payroll. But the truth? Cutting me cost them more than they ever imagined, because soon after it was their profits that started bleeding. Tell me, friends, have you ever been laid off or downsized by a company that didn't realize your true value? How did it turn out? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it. Today's video is about how my job was cut to save costs, but in the end, I was the one who cut their profits. Stay tuned, hit subscribe, and let's dive in. It all started with a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. My manager called me in, kept his voice cool and professional, and said the words that hollowed me out. Your position has been eliminated. No warning, no explanation beyond budget restructuring. I sat there stunned. For years, I had poured myself into this company, stayed late, trained new hires, helped build systems that kept projects moving smoothly. And now, suddenly, I was just gone. They slid a severance packet across the table, talked about appreciating my service. It all felt rehearsed, like they'd said the same words 100 times before. When I packed up my desk, my coworkers looked at me with pity. One whispered, "I'm sorry, this doesn't make sense." And she was right. It didn't. That night, I told my wife. She shook her head in disbelief. "After everything you've done for them?" she asked. "They cut you to save a few dollars?" Her voice was sharp, but beneath it I heard the truth. They thought they were saving money. What they didn't realize was that the very systems, the very relationships that brought in money, many of those ran through me. Over the next week, as the shock faded, anger grew. Not just anger at being discarded, but at the arrogance of it. They believed I was replaceable. They believed cutting me would make them stronger. They were wrong. Calls started coming in. Clients I'd worked with for years wanted to know why emails weren't being answered, why timelines were slipping. One even tracked me down at home. "Michael, we're not getting the reports you always sent. What's happening over there?" I realized then, my absence wasn't invisible. It was loud. It was costing them. And that's when an idea began to form. I couldn't get my old job back, not yet. But I could remind the company, in the clearest way possible, just how valuable I had been. They had cut me. Now it was time to cut their profits. The first real crack appeared less than 2 weeks after I left. A longtime client reached out, frustrated. "We're not getting the numbers we need," she said. "Your reports were always clear. Now it's late, and when it does arrive, it's full of mistakes." I listened carefully, my anger simmering. "I'm no longer with the company," I explained. "They cut my position." There was a pause on the other end, followed by disbelief. "They let you go? That explains everything." That conversation lit a spark. Because it wasn't just one client. Over the next month, 3 more reached out, each echoing the same frustration. Slower responses, confusing deliverables. No one seemed to know what was going on. It was clear, without me, the systems I'd built were collapsing. The cost-saving measure was already costing them dearly, and here's the twist. I hadn't planned it. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I had walked away clean. The downfall was their own doing. But now, opportunity was knocking, and I decided to answer. I reached out to those clients, not as their old contact, but as myself. "If you're unhappy," I told them honestly, "I can help. I know your systems, I know your needs, and I can deliver the results you're missing." One by one, they signed contracts with me directly. At first, it was small projects, consulting, cleanup work. But word spread quickly. Soon, the same clients that once paid the company thousands every month were paying me instead. By the end of the quarter, I was making more than my old salary. And the company? They were bleeding, losing clients, losing credibility, scrambling to figure out why. Meanwhile, inside the office, whispers began. Old colleagues called me discreetly, saying things like, "They're panicking. The boss keeps asking why clients are slipping away." Some even admitted they wanted out too, asking if I had room to bring them on board. I didn't poach. I didn't pressure anyone. But I didn't stop them either. Slowly, the team Aaron, my former boss, had prided himself on leading started looking less loyal, less certain. And here's what made it sweeter. Everything I did was above board, legal, transparent. I wasn't burning bridges. I was building my own. The irony was almost too perfect. They had cut me to save money. But in reality, they had cut the one person who made them money. By the time the next quarter's financials rolled around, the damage was undeniable. Revenue had dipped, profits had shrunk, and the executives were furious. I heard through a colleague that my name came up in board meetings more than once, not with praise, of course, but with regret. "How did we let him go?" someone had asked. That question made me smile, because by then I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, running my own business, working with clients who respected me, making more money, and doing it on my terms. And the company that once thought they could erase me, they were starting to realize the cost of their arrogance. They had cut my job, but I had cut their profits. And the best part? I was only just getting started. By the third month, the cracks inside the company had become chasms. Revenue reports leaked through old colleagues, and the numbers were brutal. Two of the biggest accounts had pulled out completely, both of them now working with me. A third client had cut their contracts in half, citing loss of confidence. The so-called cost-cutting measure was now costing them millions. Then came the phone call. I was sitting at my dining room table, reviewing proposals for a new client, when my phone buzzed with a familiar number, HR. At first, I laughed. After the way they'd escorted me out, box in hand, they had the nerve to call me now? I let it ring twice before picking up. "Hello, Michael," the HR manager said, her tone unusually sweet. "We were wondering if you'd be open to a conversation about consulting with us again." Consulting? The word nearly made me choke on my coffee. They weren't asking me back as an employee. No, now they needed me as an outsider, because they knew I held the keys to fixing the mess. "I'm quite busy with clients at the moment," I replied evenly. "But I'll listen." She launched into a rehearsed pitch. How they valued my expertise, how much they respected my years of service, how the timing of my position being cut had been unfortunate. Every word was a mask for the truth. They were desperate. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply told her to put the offer in writing and email me. 2 days later, the letter arrived. They wanted me back to restructure the very systems they had dismantled. The kicker? They were offering triple my old salary for the contract. When I showed the letter to my wife, she burst out laughing. "So let me get this straight. They fired you to save money, and now they're offering to pay 3 times as much to bring you back?" "Exactly," I said, shaking my head. "Poetic, isn't it? But here's the thing. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. I had built something of my own now. Clients trusted me, respected me. I wasn't another cog in their machine anymore. Still, the irony was too rich to ignore, so I agreed to meet. Walking back into that building was surreal. Some people looked shocked to see me. Others smiled quietly, almost relieved. But the executives, oh, their faces told the whole story. They looked tired, frustrated, and more than a little humbled. We sat down in the boardroom, the same room where my job had been cut months earlier. This time, the energy was different. They weren't in control. I was. "Michael," one executive began, "we recognize now that letting you go was a mistake. We'd like you to help us rebuild." I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. "You thought I was expendable, but now you see, I wasn't the cost. I was the value." They didn't argue. They couldn't. The ball was in my court, and for the first time I realized something. Revenge didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was as simple as watching them pay, literally, for their own arrogance. And oh, they were paying now. The boardroom was silent, every eye fixed on me. Just months ago, they had tossed me out like old furniture. Now they were waiting, anxious, nervous, for me to speak. I tapped the contract on the table. "Triple my old salary. Interesting offer," I said calmly. "But if I'm going to consider this, there are going to be conditions." One executive leaned forward. "We're open to hearing them." And so, for the first time in my career, I laid down the rules. "First," I said, "I work as an independent consultant. I'm not your employee anymore. That means I choose my hours, my projects, and my terms. I don't answer to mid-level managers. I answer only to this board." They shifted in their seats, but nodded. They had no choice. "Second," I continued, "if I'm going to fix your systems, I get to choose the team I work with. No more dead weight, no more politics. If someone slows us down, they're out. Immediately." One of them frowned. "That might be difficult." I leaned back in my chair. "So is losing millions in revenue, but you've already experienced that, haven't you?" The room fell quiet. Finally, Robert, the senior executive, cleared his throat. "Agreed." "Third," I said, my voice steady, "I want full transparency. No more cutting corners, no more hiding behind buzzwords. If there are problems, they get put on the table and we solve them. Otherwise, this isn't worth my time. They exchanged uneasy glances, but again they nodded. I looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. You cut my job because you thought you were saving money. Instead, you cut your profits. I'm here to help, but on my terms. If you don't like that, I can walk out right now and your clients will follow me out the door. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Finally, Robert leaned forward. You'll have it all. The independence, the authority, the transparency. Just help us fix this. I let out a slow breath and signed the contract. Not because I needed them, I was already thriving on my own, but because the symbolism was too perfect. They had discarded me, and now they were crawling back, paying triple to buy back what they had thrown away. As I walked out of that meeting, I passed by familiar faces in the hallway. Some smiled, some looked stunned. A few whispered, "He's back." But they didn't realize the truth. I wasn't back. Not really. I hadn't returned to be an employee again. I had returned as the man they couldn't replace, the man they now had to respect, whether they liked it or not. That evening, I told my wife what happened. She laughed, shaking her head. So let me get this straight. They fired you to cut costs, and now they're paying you more than ever to come back and clean up the mess? Exactly, I said, grinning. And this time, I'm the one setting the rules. Because sometimes revenge isn't about shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes it's about walking back in with your head held high, knowing the very people who tried to erase you are now forced to write you back into the story, on your terms. Taking the contract felt like stepping onto familiar ground, but with brand new shoes. I wasn't the same man who had walked out months earlier with a cardboard box in his arms. Back then, I had felt powerless, discarded, humiliated. Now, I walked into that office as someone they couldn't ignore. From day one, the difference was clear. I didn't sit at my old desk. I didn't clock in like everyone else. Instead, I came in as a consultant, head held high, schedule in my hands, authority written into my contract. The same people who once whispered pity now greeted me with respect, even admiration. And Aaron, the manager who had been so quick to cut costs by cutting me, now had to sit in meetings and listen while I explained how his mistakes had gutted profits. He avoided my eyes, but I didn't need confrontation. The silence was punishment enough. My plan worked. Within weeks, the systems I restructured began producing results. Clients noticed the difference immediately. One even sent an email to the executives. If Michael's leading this, we'll stay. If not, we walk. That single line told the whole story, but here's the part that gave me the deepest satisfaction. I didn't have to sabotage or seek revenge in the shadows. All I did was stand firm, use the skills I already had, and let the truth speak louder than their arrogance. The company's profits slowly began to recover, but they never regained the edge they'd had when I was a full-time employee. Because by then, I was no longer theirs. I was independent, choosing the clients I wanted, setting the rules I lived by. One Friday afternoon, after wrapping up a major project, Robert, the senior executive, pulled me aside. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "Letting you go was the biggest mistake this department ever made. We thought we were saving money. Instead, we nearly destroyed ourselves." I nodded politely. "Sometimes lessons are expensive," I replied. That night, over dinner, my wife raised her glass. "To being cut down," she said with a grin, "and cutting back harder." We laughed, but in that laughter was truth. Because here's what I learned. Being fired isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of something stronger. Sometimes it's the push you need to realize your worth, to build something on your own, and to prove, beyond a shadow of doubt, that you were never the problem. They cut my job, but I cut their profits. And in the process, I built a new life on my terms. And that, friends, is how I turned a layoff into leverage. They thought cutting me was saving money, but in the end, it cost them more than they ever imagined. This story taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes what feels like a loss is really an opportunity in disguise. When a company treats you as expendable, don't let it define you. Let it remind you of your value, and if you play it right, they'll see it too, whether they admit it or not. Thank you for listening. If you've ever been laid off or underestimated at work, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me here on Office Revenge Tales for the next story of justice served.